Alright guys, so here is day 3 of the trig section that we've been working on. This is where we actually start to dig into a little bit more of the equations with trig. You should have watched the video prior to this. It should be labeled Intro to Trig. That'll give you at least just a little bit of an introduction into some of the words and vocab and equations that you'll be using in this section. You'll still get to hear it in this video, but it might be a good idea to watch that one first, just to get a little bit of an idea before you do more of the equation stuff. And there's also a little fun video with the SOHCAHTOA song to help you remember those acronyms, because it's very, very, very important that you know those. Sine, cosine, and tangent are going to be used a lot in this section. In fact, that's really what this whole unit is all about, is those trig functions. So make sure you get those memorized. If it means making up your own song or drawing a picture or just rewriting SOHCAHTOA 10 billion times, do whatever it takes. Just make sure that you personally remember it. So let's start with this example. First of all, we need to make sure we know how to label correctly. Otherwise, you kind of ruin the whole problem. So the side that's never going to change is the hypotenuse. So I always suggest starting with that. Remember, it's the longest side and it's across from the 90-degree angle. 90 degrees is this little box right there. So across from that is this guy. So we're just going to label it HYP to abbreviate. And then opposite and adjacent are always based on whichever angle you're using. You can't use C because that's the right angle, but A and B are the ones that we're going to pick. If I look over to the left-hand side, all of these are talking about angle A. So obviously that's my angle I need to focus on. So if I look at angle A, and I pretend like I'm standing in that corner. In the other video, I kind of talked about the analogy of having like a little Nerf gun and standing in that corner. If I shot a little Nerf gun from there, pew, and it shot across, you would hit this side, which means that's the opposite side. Adjacent is just a fancy word that means next to or beside. So this one is our adjacent side because it's right next to angle A. Okay, so make sure you have those labeled first before you start anything else. Over here on the left-hand side, it's just a matter of plugging in the correct sides. So sine, remember, oops, that was really bad looking. SOHCAHTOA. SOHCAHTOA stands for the different words that go with each trig function. So S stands for sine, O stands for opposite, H stands for hypotenuse. So in our fraction, opposite of angle A is CB. So that's going in that blank. The hypotenuse never changes. That's always AB. Cosine, so C stands for cosine, A stands for adjacent, and H stands for the hypotenuse. So the adjacent side is AC. And again, our hypotenuse is AB. And then last but not least, TOA. T stands for tangent, and then O stands for opposite, A for adjacent. So opposite, again, like we labeled it, is CB. Adjacent is AC. All right, so no numbers or anything, just picking out which sides go with which trig function. All right, so make sure you have that written down. Pause if you need to, rewind if necessary. Moving right along, now we're going to throw in some actual numbers. Again, you got to label first. Start off with your hypotenuse. It's never going to change, so might as well pick that one first. Again, I know it's the hypotenuse because it's the longest and it's across from the 90 degrees. These all are talking about angle A, so that's my focus angle I'm going to use. So what side is opposite of angle A? Again, pretend like you're a little person standing in that corner and you shoot a Nerf gun out. You're going to hit CB. So that's the opposite side. And then that leaves this one to be our adjacent side, which means next to, like we talked about before. Okay, over here with our fractions, that's just a matter of putting in the numbers. Sine, remember, if you want to rewrite SOHCAHTOA, you can. It's all right. You can rewrite it as many times as you need. SOHCAHTOA. All right, so sine is opposite hypotenuse. Okay, well, opposite of A is CB, and that's 3. The hypotenuse is 5, so sine of angle A is 3 over 5. Pretty easy fraction to work with so far. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So if we look at the side adjacent to A, I know it's covered up, but it is a 4 there. And that's over the hypotenuse, which is 5. And then we have tangent. Let's do that in a different color. T is for tangent, O is for opposite, A for adjacent. So pick the sides that match. Opposite side is 3, adjacent side is 4, so 3 over 4 is the fraction for that one. All right, hopefully pretty easy so far. Just really a matter of picking out which sine, cosine, tangent you're using, and then deciding what numbers go with that. So once you have that, go ahead, whoops, went too far. Go ahead and pause and try this one out on your own. When you're done, hit play, and then I'll go through the answers for that. But you should try it out on your own, see if you can get it correct by yourself. All right, hopefully you did that. Make sure you labeled correctly. Again, this is hypotenuse. If you look at all of the things, this time we're using angle B. So look across from B. That means this side is opposite and this side's adjacent. So if you messed up there, go ahead and pause, really try your fractions again, see if you can fix your own mistakes without going through all the answers. Sine is SOH, S-O-H, opposite over hypotenuse, so 21 over 75. Cosine is CAH, C-A-H, adjacent over hypotenuse would be 72 over 75. And tangent is TOA. So that would be opposite over adjacent. Okay, so opposite would be 21, adjacent is 72. All right, oops, I wrote 75, even though I said 72. Let's try that again. 72, there we go. All right, so check and make sure that your numbers match mine. Otherwise, you got some mistakes, which is fine because we're just beginning this section. Now we're going to jump over and do some actual equations with this. Okay, now this is the part where you have a few things to think about. You've got to start with naming your sides, first of all, just like we did before. So again, I'm going to start with hypotenuse. I know that because it's across from the 90-degree angle. The only angle they give me is the 50, so that has to be the angle that I'm focusing on. Opposite of the 50-degree, if I go right across from that, is this side. So this is my opposite. Obviously, that leaves this as my adjacent side. So now you have to actually do a little bit of critical thinking. You got to figure out what it is you're going to use. All right, because they're not going to just lay it out whether it's sine, cosine, tangent. You have to make the decision. So let's circle the sides that actually have something on them. Hypotenuse has the number 10, so that's probably a side I want to use. Circle that. Adjacent has nothing on it. Can't really use it then. If there's nothing labeled on that side, it's not really much help. And opposite has B. That's our variable that we're going to use. All right, so I have 2 of the 3 sides available. I'm going to write out SOH again, just to make it easier for myself to see. All right, well, which one of these has opposite hypotenuse with it? Okay, well, the only one I see that has that is sine. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Can't use cosine because that needs adjacent. Don't have anything there. Can't use tangent because that also needs adjacent. Don't have anything there. So must mean that I'm going to use sine for this. Now, you got to put your degree next to your trig function. So it's going to be sine of 50. And then I'm going to put my fraction on the other side. Now follow your SOH to figure out which one goes where. It's opposite over hypotenuse because it's SOH. So opposite in this triangle is B. That has to go on the top of the fraction. And then hypotenuse is 10. That has to go on the bottom. All right, so that's how you build your equations for these problems. The math behind it actually goes back to some of the stuff we talked about last week. We need proportions, so we're going to make one. Okay, if I just put this over 1, now I've got 2 fractions to work with. Hopefully you remember from last week, if you've got a proportion, you can solve by cross multiplying. So that was the whole reason I put that sine of 50 over 1. It's just like any other number. It's just kind of a crazy decimal when you type it in, but it's still a number. Doesn't change the properties of it. B times 1 is B, so that's on that side by itself. Okay, and I want you to be careful. This is not sine of 500 now. I know some of you might be tempted to put those numbers together and try and distribute or do something crazy. You can't do that. Sine, cosine, tangent kind of cement themselves together with whatever angle they're working with. Okay, so you can't distribute that 10. That 10 is not an angle. It's a totally different part of the problem, so make sure you keep it separate. On your calculator, if you're using one of mine, you're going to need to type in this part first, and it's kind of backwards. So you type in 50, then hit the sign button. You should get some decimal. And then should be about 0.766, and then a bunch of other numbers. Then you can multiply it by the number in front. If you do it correctly, your final answer when you round off to 2 decimal places, which would be the hundredths, is 7.66. All right, so hopefully you come up with that. If you're not sure, make sure to come talk to one of us if the calculator is the biggest issue, but make sure you've got the equation part figured out first. And moving on to the next one. All right, so I'll walk you through this one a little bit. Same thing, make sure you label everything. Start with your hypotenuse. Hopefully that's the easiest side to label. This time the angle is down in the bottom right-hand corner, so it is going to change where our opposite adjacent are. Opposite of the 42 is this blank side, and then the one labeled with D is our adjacent side. All right, hopefully easy first step is getting the labeling down. Hopefully you're feeling a little bit more comfortable with that by now. Now you got to figure out which ones we're going to use. All right, well there's nothing on the opposite side, so don't use that. There's a D on the adjacent side. Probably want to include that since I'm solving for D. And on the hypotenuse, there's a number 7. Okay, well only 2 of the 3 sides have something, so I got to use those 2. Write out our SOHCAHTOA. You're going to have that acronym ingrained in your brain by the time you're done with these problems. The only ones that have adjacent and hypotenuse included in it are this part, which is cosine. That's what the C stands for. So I have to use cosine. That's how you decide which one to pick. It's going to be cosine of 42. And then I got to make sure I put them in order. It's SOHCAH, so C-A-H means I have to do adjacent over hypotenuse. So D goes on the top, 7 goes on the bottom. Okay. Same thing as the first one. Want to make a proportion, so put cosine 42 over 1, just like we do any number, and start cross multiplying. All right, so we have D times 1, which is just D, and we have 7 times cosine of 42. Again, if you're using one of my calculators, it has to work a little bit backwards. So because of that, you're going to have to type in 42 first, then hit cosine, then multiply by 7. All right, so make sure if you have one of mine, you move a little bit backwards when you're typing stuff in. If you've got a more advanced one, I think a TI 32 or 34, I'm not quite sure what the number is, then you might actually be able to type all of that in order, just like I've got it right here, and it should work out really nicely, which is kind of great. All right, I would like you guys to try this one on your own. I'm going to write down what the answers should be, but pause here, do this one. I don't quite have enough time to do this one and the next one that I like to do, but feel free to check your work. When you solve it, x should equal 42.84, but you need to try that. The work for it is also on the PDF that's attached. I would like to do this one though. Hypotenuse, opposite, adjacent. Gotta use this one and this one. I'm gonna go through it a little bit more quickly. It's tangent 20. This time you gotta be careful though. It's not x on the top, it's 8 because it's opposite over adjacent. You're still gonna cross multiply, but you're gonna see it comes up a little bit weird this time. 8 times 1 is 8. And then you've got x times tangent 20. That means you're going to have to do a little bit of an extra step here to get x by itself. You're going to have to divide both sides by tangent 20 to get x alone. Okay, so one little extra step If you do that, then you should get that x is 21.98.